Players are looking for a quick and easy experience, whether that be depositing or withdrawing. I must have looked at 7 to 10 different types of open banking products. What we liked about Yaspa were really two main things. One was the ease of use for the customer. Secondly, the big thing about Yaspa was their sort of future vision for what is going to be required in this market. A huge thing for me was the people involved in the business, people you actually want to spend time with and time communicating with, and they massively tick that box. So I'm commercial director at Playbook, so responsible for our existing product makeup, suppliers, commercial relationships with all of our operating brands and with suppliers. So Playbook is a platform provider at its core and provide all the products to our 10 operating partners. So as of today, we have 10 brands essentially that are live purely in the UK. So all UK GC licensed. Playbook is owned by the Star Group, which is a relatively well-known B2C operator with retail shops, presence on racetracks, and their online business, Star Sports Bet. We then have probably about 3 brands further to that are owned by Star as a group. So that's Priced Up, NRG, and Planet Sport Bet. And then we have roughly 6 brands that are purely independent. So therefore, we just purely provide the platform, all of the products, and everything that goes to make that up. And as I say, that is all UK GC regulated activity. Well, when I came into Playbook as a business, we were probably 12 operators at the time, but only sitting across 2 licenses. So we've been through a big shift in the last year, moving to what will essentially be now 10 brands, 9 licenses. We're adding 2 more independent brands on individual licenses in the next 4 to 6 weeks. That's meant a big shift in terms of not only sort of the quality of partners that are operating, but the volume of activity that's happening through our platform. We were in a position only a few months ago where we were essentially one gateway, one acquirer, servicing all of those brands. Now, we needed to improve that situation, not only from a redundancy perspective, so that we have a second option in terms of for all operators. Let's say the worst case scenario happens on the gateway, but also we needed to provide optionality to our players. So in this day and age, all consumers are used to using open banking in some description, whether that be traditional, their bank to bank, or is that sort of Apple Pay, Google Pay, etc. So what we need to do is not be so reliant on cards and people implementing their card details, but move to a more kind of smoother customer journey for the player was our biggest priority. Players are looking for a quick and easy experience, whether that be depositing or withdrawing. So how can you make that as painless as possible? And by painless, that means reducing the number of steps required for them, certainly as a brand new customer depositing for the first time into an account, but also for existing customers who don't necessarily want to constantly be able to check card details, last 4 digits, correct card. I think customers have a lot more confidence in that being in terms of directly from bank to bank, and essentially that experience of trusting that money, being able to see it remove automatically, and same on the withdrawal side. So how can you reduce any friction from a customer's perspective, but also from a Playbook and platform perspective? How quickly can we understand if something is going wrong at that stage? And I believe that is where sort of open banking has a lead on other sort of payment methods. I must have looked at 7 to 10 different types of open banking products. I think there was a number that we ruled out immediately through being relatively clunky. So heavy usage of QR codes, for example, requiring actually further steps for the customer to make that what is technically an open banking process, but for us far too layered in its approach. What we liked about Yaspa were really 2 main things. One was the ease of use for the customer in terms of their journey, and as I say, removing as many steps as possible. Secondly, the big thing about Yaspa was their sort of future vision for what is going to be required in this market, whether that be from a player safety perspective, data analytics, then working closely with the UKGC, with government bodies, regarding what that piece looks like in such a critical period for that area was a huge kind of selling point. So it was really 2 things. One, how easy the product is to use for the customers, and secondly, how conscious the business was of what's going to be required and what is required from a kind of player safety and affordability perspective. A huge thing for me was the people involved in the business. So from Amy to Yasmin, Andrea, Luke, other people, everybody I met in the business was really personable, normal, friendly, fun. And when you're having to deal with 40, 50 suppliers for a gaming, essentially operator as we work, it's really important to have people you trust, first and foremost, that are quick and efficient in terms of any issues and communication, and are pleasant to work with, people you actually want to spend time with and time communicating with. And they massively tick that box as a point of difference as a business. What I've seen hugely with Yaspa in the early stages, it's always tricky onboarding a new supplier in any area. Certain things will go wrong. But Yaspa is probably the best experience I've had in regards to attention to detail, care, reacting when there's problems, because there's always problems, and how quickly they've managed to react when things have not gone as planned has been incredibly impressive and helpful. And that's the feedback I get from my engineering team, our marketing team, our compliance team, is, when these things arise, they've been handled quickly and professionally, which isn't always the case. Well, it just had a big impact in helping me sleep at night, in the fact that for the first time since I've certainly been with Playbook, we have genuine redundancy on the platform. So we have two payment methods working at once, and if one goes down, the other is 90% plus success rate on both sides, withdrawals and deposits. So that's a huge value. What our partners are also seeing is, since we launched the open banking piece, there has been a gradual movement of customers more towards the open banking product. Now, open banking is never going to be the majority share at the moment in terms of wallet, in terms of deposits. But that wasn't necessarily the purpose. The purpose is, I believe we're up to sort of 15 to 20% of all deposits going through Yaspa, which within 2-3 months is incredible. And I see that only growing, because obviously customers are finding that once they find it, and we place it second on our depositing options, and I think there's more of a case of maybe changing that piece. But also the customers are, once they do use it, they don't seem to be going back to the card options. They remain with it. I always have an image of our customers being out and about, whether they're actually at the racetracks themselves or if they're in the pub with their mates watching sport or wherever they may be. It's much simpler to use that process for them. I think operationally, what is exciting, I think we're just getting started really with how we can work from a sort of more of a compliance perspective, because that's really the key area in regards to payments, is how can we learn as an operator and as a platform as much information in real time as possible of that transaction that will help us not only protect the players, but also look to the future in regards to how we're positioning products, learning about them as a player, and protecting them as a player. So we're seeing roughly kind of, as I say, at the moment, it's been increasing month on month in terms of the share of deposits that we're using on open banking, and that's increasing, which is showing us a sign that players, once they find it, are using that tool. So therefore, it automatically suggests it's a very good retention tool for us. The biggest win in the industry is the onboarding of customers. How smoothly and seamless can you make that print, and the speed of withdrawals. That seems to be the biggest battle in the industry at the moment. Who can win those battles? I would say even more than the pricing of certain markets, the use of certain games, where potentially people don't differ hugely, is allowing the customer that smoothest experience. They're always going to go back to what they can rely upon in terms of depositing, playing, and withdrawing as quickly as possible. And that's where we see Yaspa's added a huge amount of value. I was conscious when we signed and formed the partnership with Yaspa. The Yaspa was a smaller business than some that are out in the market right now that are sort of more established and been around a longer time. And that's normally a concern of a business is, okay, well, do we take what is technically more of a risk open with a smaller, sort of high growth, but smaller business at that time? And I think I just couldn't be more impressed in terms of the people across all the key verticals, in terms of we never felt that was the case. You know, the amount of attention, resource, the quality of people I've been absolutely outstanding by that are involved in the business, has meant that it's kind of had that bigger corporate feel, whilst having that sort of personal touch, which I personally appreciate. And seeing how Yaspa's growing and developing as a business has been really positive for me, because I feel that they deserve that, you know, knowing how hard they work. I mean, the honest truth is, when I brought in Yaspa initially, it was really just for that second payment method. We hadn't really looked. I knew what was coming, but that wasn't a priority, is looking at the intelligence payments, the data analytics, what they can build at that point of transaction, essentially. However, you know, now we have the core payment method in, we're sort of been really excited by seeing what's coming now and what's actually ready now, which is the intelligence payments, the player safety data, the commercial data that can actually give you in the form of dashboards regarding those real-time analytics on transactional behavior. That's incredibly valuable, and not just from a necessary, potentially boring compliance standpoint, which is the biggest area, quite rightly, for us and for the industry, but also what more can come from that, from commercial learnings and understanding. Because with that information, ultimately what we want to get to is a point where marketeers, product experts can start making informed decisions at that point, in respectful to that data. I think what we're seeing is a real shift in the market now. So traditionally, our business, if you look at Star Sports, has been a very VIP driven brand, which means generally larger deposits, fewer number of players. We've evolved over the last 12 months to really be kind of a spectrum for what brands need. So where I believe the market is heading, it's going to become much more of a social and entertainment type product in the UK. I think that is just having its natural progression. I believe it's going to become much more of an entertainment product than a relatively old-fashioned betting product, if that makes sense. Now, we're constantly seeing that. Merge is probably too strong, but the connection between traditional sports media and maybe for more kind of mobile, fun, social games, and the betting industry getting closer and closer. So for me, the industry is moving much more towards a trajectory whereby those ties to traditional media, more social, casual games will become closer and closer. And what I think that will mean is a much higher volume of plays, but a much lower spend, if that makes sense. So we're already seeing it with the new rules being brought in on slots and how much people can pay per spin, if you like. But I think that will become much wider across the industry. I mean, if you look across the water to the US, for example, micro betting's becoming much bigger. And I think that trend, whilst I'm not a huge believer on how big that will be in the UK in the next, say, 12 months, ultimately, I think that is the direction the industry is going into, in which it will be much more about in-play activity, engaging the customer, keeping the customer on site longer, and betting smaller amounts, but more often in a more of a casual, fun manner, rather than relying on big players, wanting to spend big on individual bets. So really enjoyed working with Yaspa so far. They've been a pleasure to work with as a partner, and it is a genuine partnership, which is what a supplier and platform needs to be. And yeah, we are looking to take that partnership much further in the coming months and years.